So today's our last opportunity to look into the great themes of the book of Ecclesiastes. We began looking at the very frequently repeated refrain that all is vanity or all is vapor, that everything comes and goes, and that is a truth about the reality that we live. Next, we looked at how important it is to fear God, to honor God for being God, and to not try to take that role on ourselves. But to recognize that there are things way beyond our control. And whenever we attempt to control what is uncontrollable, we fool ourselves into believing ourselves capable of power that we don't have. Last week we looked at the refrain to eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we may die. A reminder to live in the present, to not be so attached to our things, to not be so attached to what we don't have but want, and to simply enjoy the gifts of the relationships, the life, the food, the drink that God has placed before us right now. Because who knows? Tomorrow Harvey may come and wash it all away. Today, we take up the last theme, which I would encapsulate in a very simple phrase. Everything belongs. Everything belongs. It's all part of the whole. And you can't take out the bad from the good any more than you can unmix flour and water. The passage we have before us talks about there being a time for everything, and puts in opposition things that puts together things that we think about as being in opposition to one another: birth and death, planting and ripping up plants. And what that reminded me of initially was a conversation that I had with Matt Farnsworth, the guy who had built my in-laws' house down in Rockport. Matt's house took a pretty good hit. It's still standing, but he lost a brick wall. He lost a lot of his roof. He got a lot of water in the house, but it's still standing and it's still functional, and he can redo it. He's got insurance. But Matt said simultaneously, this has been the most incredible experience of love I've ever known. To see people from all over the state and all over the country flood our small town with their willingness to lend a hand, their willingness to help somebody they don't know from Adam, to get a tree off of their house, or to get a tree out of their yard, or to feed them food because they have no way of fixing it anymore. He said, with tears in his eyes, and this is a guy who doesn't cry, this has been an incredibly blessed and blessing experience for me. Simultaneously, the grief of loss for himself and for his fellow Rockport citizens, and joy and gratitude and love. We don't think of those all going together, and yet they do. And if we think about our own lives, we notice that happens actually rather frequently for us. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with a member of a family who has just lost a loved one to a terribly long-suffering disease. And they talk about experiencing both gratitude and relief right alongside grief and pain at the loss. It's all together. You can't pull it apart. So I want to talk today about how all this holds together, how it all belongs, how it all is supposed to be part of the fabric of the reality that we live. But I want you to share a little bit with somebody around you an experience you've had of apparently contradictory emotions that you've lived at the same time. Contradictory emotions that you've lived at the same time. I'll give you one other example to maybe spark your imaginations. As a parent, when you're coming out of the grocery store and your little kid runs into the parking lot where you know cars are not being as careful as they should be, it scares the bejesus out of you. And when you get that kid, before hopefully he or she is hit by a car, you grab them and you go, "Don't you know not to do that?" And you're mad as hell. And at the same time, you love them with everything in you. And you're crying because you're glad they're safe. Contradictory, all together at the same time, right? We live this a lot in life. Think about a time when you lived something like that and share it with a friend. Real quick, a couple minutes. Yes?
You picked the right one, Rob. I did a bunch of those.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it was just
others.
the experience of tragedy I often find for folks is filled with this. When we went through it in Wimberley, it was the same thing. When so many people were devastated, and people just jump in and they get dirty and they sweat and they labor and they exhaust themselves trying to help somebody out. And those folks are they're just devastated, but at the same time they're full of gratitude for the outpouring of love.
Kindness.
Yes, it's incredible. Yeah, just incredible.
Having been to those horrible earthquakes in Central America and seeing the response after,
Same thing. Same kind of thing.
Tragedy.
Yeah, tragedy and There's a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. Birth and death, planting, uprooting, killing, healing, weeping, laughing, mourning, dancing, tearing, sowing, silence, speech, war, and peace. These opposites form the fabric of life as we know it. In fact, I just read this week that in Islam, one of the images that's used to talk about human beings is to say that we are woven out of a little bit of heaven and a little bit of earth. Now, if any of you have ever woven anything, you know that you've got lines of thread that go this way, and then you have lines that go this way that go in and out of those ones that are going vertical. Well, if you were to pull either direction out, you would not have any fabric. It would completely disintegrate. That they both are essential in order to create the fabric that you have. And in our tradition, we talk about original sin and original blessing as kind of those pieces. We are originally blessed as made in the image of God, but then there is this idea of our being also having woven into us this defect, if you will, this problem that keeps us from fully living out of that wonderful participation in the holy of God. What's interesting is that we are not responsible for either of those. It's like they're both given to us. And we got to live out of both of those realities. You can't pull one out. You can't destroy one and only live out of the other. Anybody who's ever tried will realize just how impossible that is. And we get glimpses in our lives of how this all weaves together. When Wimberley was flooded 2 years ago, we experienced exactly what Rockport is experiencing right now. Inundated by people who showed up from all over to give time, energy, love, companionship, support, money, food, whatever they had to help us out. And it was indeed an incredibly moving experience to witness the best of humanity. But like Rockport, there's also that dimension of humanity that will take advantage of that kind of moment. Electricians who show up and will hook your house up to a generator in 20 minutes for $350 because you need it that bad. People who take advantage of the tire shop being ripped open to get themselves a new set of mag wheels. It's all together. It's all right there together. But it's that way throughout the entire creation. Look at the light and the darkness of the universe. Look at the good and evil that we experience in our very own selves. You don't have to look very far to see that it's all there. And so as I was reflecting on this text, and I got the email devotional from Richard Rohr this week that was titled, "Everything Belongs," I thought, wow, that's confirmation. I want to read you just a little bit of that devotional because it speaks so directly to this theme. Our truest self, he says, knows that everything belongs. That means holding together the good and the bad, the dark and the light, the sinner and the saint, which are two parts of me and two parts of everything. It is our own participation in God which allows us to embrace all of it. For when we allow God to hold together the opposites that exist within us, it then becomes possible to do it over there in our neighbor, or over there even in our enemy. Our worldview and our politics begin to change. We can no longer project evil onto another country as the bad guys, or another religion, or another ethnicity, or another race, or even another political party. Because we now recognize that it all dwells in us. You know, in many ways, it's easiest to see some of the wholeness of the opposites by looking at the universe around us. You look at the sky at night and you love the stars, you see their beauty, but that beauty is absolutely invisible to us if it weren't for the darkness that was all around it. You wouldn't see them. When the sun comes out, you don't get to see the stars, do you? And what about our planet? Our planet that goes around and around and around and is dark and then light and dark and then light, exposed to the sun and then protected from the sun. If we did not exist in that rhythm of protection and exposure, what would happen? Half of our Earth would be fried and the other half would be frozen. It takes both, the dark and the light, for us to be able to sustain life, for this planet to be able to exist as it does. And what about around us in the world? What about inside us in our own lives? Beth and I went to see Dunkirk. I don't know how many of you have seen Dunkirk. It's a movie about the rescue by British civilians of the soldiers who were fleeing France, the onslaught of the German army in France, and they needed to be escorted across the British Channel, the English Channel there, and the civilians came in their boats and loaded up soldiers to get them across. Dunkirk is a movie that probably has maybe 6 pages of script. There's very little spoken in the movie. but it does an incredible job of unpacking how the tragedy and the horror of war brings out the very worst and the very best of humanity. Once again, self-sacrificial actions by people who lay down their lives in order to save others, and others who want only to survive themselves and will scapegoat anybody else in order to get what they need, even at the destruction of others. The best and the worst comes right out. In the Holocaust Museum that we went to recently, we looked at the pictures of German soldiers, commanders, who by day were frying Jewish men, women, and children in the ovens and furnaces of the death camps. But by night were wonderful fathers to their own little children, loving them, blessing them, raising them up. Blessing, curse, good, evil, right within the same human being. And it's exactly what we saw and are seeing in Rockport and Houston and Louisiana as these storms devastate and provoke some to great acts of heroic sacrifice to save others and to help them rebuild, while others only see it as an opportunity to take advantage for their own good. The greatest challenge for me as I try to integrate this truth is remembering that what is true of me is true of every other human being. Every other human being. Including the leader of North Korea, including the person who stole that set of mag wheels, including the ones who I so easily can claim to be worthless. Even there is a mixture of good and not so good. That's the hardest part for me. But it is the part that Jesus lands so squarely on over and over again. He lands squarely on it when he says, "Blessed are you when you are persecuted. Pray for those who persecute you. Bless them, do not curse them." He lands on it again when he talks about the parable of the wheat and the tares and how it's all blended together and that you can't pull up the weeds without destroying the wheat, whether that's in your own life or in somebody else's life. And if you think you can, you're fooling yourself. Only God can separate them out. And he hits it again at the very end, when he takes death by torture and he turns it into a means of redemption. When from the cross he looks at those who have been beating and nailing him and he says, "Forgive them. They don't understand what they're doing. They are not evil. They are ignorant." And that's not the same thing. And when he comes to this table that we are about to come to as well, and he feeds the disciples who are about to betray him, and he says, "This is my body, given for you. This is my blood, which will be shed tomorrow for you." It's all part of the whole. I know who you are. I know where you will fail, but I will still love you, even if I cry when you fail me. Friends, there's a time for everything because everything belongs. Everything that we are experiencing now belongs, and every opportunity is a chance for us to live out of one or the other of these pieces of ourself. My prayer and my hope is that the tragedies that have struck our region will pull from us some of the very best that we have known in ourselves, so that we may give that to others, that they may experience the gift of God's amazing and overwhelming love that is for rich and poor, for good and bad, for powerful and powerless alike. Let us pray. Amoroso Dios, gracias por darnos en Jesucristo el ejemplo de uno quien supo cómo vivir de lo mejor de su persona y invitar a nosotros vivir igual. Perdónanos cuando queremos culpar a unos como si no tenemos también la culpa. Ayúdanos a descubrir la unidad en todo lo que tú has hecho parte de nuestra realidad. Por Cristo te lo pedimos. Amén.